Hey guys, so today I thought I pressed record on our class recording and I did not, turns out. So I'm going to record this for the people who are working from home today. Just know that your classmates were totally brilliant today. Not all of these ideas that I'm going to be sharing are my own. I'm kind of stealing from your classmates. Someday maybe I will steal from you too. So you've now read chapter 9 again, right? It's kind of a short chapter, and you've been looking for repetition in the entire chapter. And there's a few ways to think about repetition. Let's see. There we go. Repetition. There we go. You could think about repetition of words, certain words that are repeated over and over again. The class did point out a few of these. They said one word, let's do it like this, one word that is repeated is mean or its various forms, which we do with a star. There we go. So mean, meanness, that kind of thing, that repeats throughout the whole chapter. A word pious repeats, and along with pious, the word prayer repeats over and over again. I see a repetition of the word consequence in the chapter. Oh, and there are two instances of the word poor. There's a couple instances of the word poor, but there's one at the beginning when it is talking about the slaves and their lack of food, and then there is one at the end when it says that his sister he gave away a slave as a poor gift. So two ways that he was talking about poorness. Okay, there's a few other words that repeat throughout, but that's one way of thinking about it, repetition, is finding those patterns in the words that repeat. Another way is to think about the repetition of syntax, and that could be sentence length. It could be a repetition of the grammar, like how the sentences are structured. It could be a repetition of, the kinds of words at the beginning versus ends of sentences. And your classmates had really cool things to say about this. They were talking about how the pattern in this is to introduce one idea with certain expectations. So something like he expected blank. And then Frederick Douglass would kind of add in this, but here's what he got kind of idea. So it was like this sentence structure that introduced expectations and then undercut those expectations. And actually, let's look at the repetition of overall structure as well. This, one of your classmates, Christiane, had an amazing observation that this whole thing is actually a chiasmus. Now, if you don't know the meaning of that word, that's okay. It just means that there's a kind of cycle to the topics. So it starts with food, it goes to cruel masters, it goes to whipping, then it goes to religion. Actually, no, it goes to religion, then it goes to whipping, then it goes back to religion, it goes back to cruel masters, and it goes back to food. So it ends where it begins with this idea of food. So there's a repetition in the structure and the topics that he is approaching and what order he approaches them in. And let's see, is there any other kind of repetition we want to point out? Oh, there can also be a repetition of sounds. There's tons of alliteration throughout this chapter. For example, sanction and support for his slave-holding cruelty. That kind of alliteration repeats. So we didn't talk much in class about what each of these instances of repetition add to the text, and instead I had us focus on one. Since this was the first one someone mentioned, that was the one that we focused on, was this idea of meanness. So let's say I, in my paper, want to write about his repetition of the word mean throughout the essay. Well, the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out what is his argument about meanness, right? So I'm kind of doing this backwards. When you're doing your essay, you're going to start with an argument. But then you're going to find instances of that argument in the text, and you're going to pick them apart, and you're going to find a language choice that he makes in that instance. So if part of my argument is that slaveholders are cruel and mean, I'm going to think about his repetition of the word mean to prove that argument. But I need to be very specific then about what his argument about meanness is. So if you look in the second in the second paragraph of chapter 9, it says, he was mean, and like most other mean men, he lacked the ability to conceal his meanness. And in class, I asked, okay, what does this mean? Okay, it means he was mean, right? And he couldn't hide it. Okay, that's a really good start, right? But then we need to think about, okay, what does that word mean in this context? So, okay, let's pick it apart a little bit. I think it means like cruel. It means like unfair. It means maybe like a little sadistic. All right, so we were focusing a lot on this idea of like a mean girl type idea, like that somebody is being rude to you, you know. And then someone brought up that to them it feels like kind of like childish. The word feels like, oh, you're mean, you know, a kind of childish word. And that's when I prompted them to look up the definition, the full definition of the word mean. So go ahead and do that. You can pause the video and look up that definition. And I want you to look at all of the definitions. Now, in some ways, it's about meaning of words. That's kind of irrelevant for our purposes here. But when you see those definitions, you'll see that this is one definition of the word. And then there is a more old-fashioned definition of the word that means lowly, shabby. It means like inferior quality. So it's a class word. To say that somebody is mean means that they are only interested in kind of like material, kind of grubby things and not really interested in the life of the mind, that all they care about is like simplistic things. And it's in a negative way. It's not in a transcendental kind of way. It's in this way that means that they're inferior, that they're not as good of people. They don't have as much integrity. So to call someone mean in the olden days meant to call them lowly and inferior. And Frederick Douglass, I think, is using both meanings here. So he's saying he was mean. He's saying that he was slave owners, let's make it a little more broad, were cruel and unfair, but also of inferior quality. And here's why this is super interesting to use the double meaning of the word. To be cruel suggests a kind of power that you have over another person. You can either say things or you can act out physically on somebody to exert that power. And the slave owners in this story, in this narrative, do that quite a lot. And he describes them being mean as in aggressive. And that aggression then is a way of displaying power. We talked about that with the man whipping the woman in front of her children. It's a way of displaying his power over all slaves by having witnesses to the act of cruelty, right? But at the same time, if he keeps calling them mean, he's saying, that should say inferior, he's also saying that they are inferior. So even though they have a lot of power, they're morally inferior. And in this way, he's able to mock them at the same time as he's able to show justifiable fear towards them. So it's like the audience might be more inclined to see the slave owners as like super evil, kind of super villains, right? But they're not that way in this. They're also like pathetic and cowardly. And this word mean allows him to have that double meaning at once. And it allows his audience to see how someone could be both at once, both powerful and weak at the same time. All right, so that was all about this repetition of the word mean. Obviously, the repetition is important too, that he's going to repeat this idea over and over again. Part of that is what happens with repetition is that when you hear a word over and over again, you start to wonder if you really know what it means. So, it's for some reason the word cactus always does this for me. I hear cactus, 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 and suddenly I'm like, is that a word? How do I spell that? What does that word mean again? Like it kind of like unravels through repetition. And by repeating it, then you're suggesting, oh, it could have repeated meanings. So like different meanings in different contexts. That's kind of what I think he's doing here. So that's like what you're looking for in the chapters. You're looking for, you don't have to do, this question came up in class, and this is, I need to be very clear on this. You do not need to write a chapter. You do not need to write a paragraph about every chapter. I'm just dividing by chapters and having you notice the structure of the essay, but I think I led you astray by having you do that. All you are doing is writing about 3 persuasive strategies that he uses in this book. So if this was one of the persuasive strategies you wanted to write about, I'm going to show you how to do that next.